and hit search. GA, Georgia, should come up. Very good. Okay, now I want you to click on one of the top links there. It's the Secretary of State's website link. Mm-hmm. That's it. Okay, so looks I'm starting to see some more eyes. So it looks like everybody's there. Very good. So once you're there, you can do this on your PC as well. In that website, you can type in your information, your first initial, your last name, your date of birth, and the county within Georgia in which you live, and it will give you who your elected officials are. It will give you an option to select a sample ballot so you can actually see what the ballot will look like when you go in to vote. Now, all of you, or a lot of you, are going to have different ballots because each of you live in different places, and there are different races within each county that have different boundaries within the county. So everybody's ballot, just about, is a little bit different. Okay? So, but that ballot that you see on that website is going to be specific to where the address where you're registered to vote. If you're not coming up on that website, it's because you haven't registered to vote. And if you haven't registered to vote, you can do so on that website. Now, it's too late for you to register to vote for this November election if you haven't already. The deadline for that was October the 11th. Okay, but that website will give you all of the information you need in order to see the ballot, and on the ballot will have the questions themselves for you to study. Now, there's another website I'd like for you guys to take a look at now. Ballotopedia, like Wikipedia, but Ballotopedia. I'm terrible at spelling. Yeah, ballot, let's see. Yep, there you go, Ballotpedia, and it's a .org website. Okay, that website is not perfect. That website is created by people, and people always have agendas, and people, do one thing or another. But generally speaking, it's fairly middle of the road. It doesn't really offer much of anything by way of commentary. It's simply a place for information to be aggregated around different ballot questions and different candidates. So on that website, you can go and look and see the elected officials that you saw on the My Voter page. You can see, okay, let's take Josh Bonner. Josh Bonner, anybody know who Josh Bonner is? Raise your hand if you know who Josh Bonner is. 2. Okay, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right. He is going to be, if you live in Fayette County, most of Fayette County, he's going to be your new state rep. He's someone you should know who he is. He's someone you should have his contact information, and he's somebody that you ought to be following along with what he's voting, because he's representing you if you live in Fayette County. Who here knows who Matt Brass is? Raise your hand. If you live in Coweta County, he's going to be your state senator starting here shortly. You should know who that name is. He's representing you. If you don't know who that is, shame on you, quite frankly. All right, so Ballotopedia, though, you take Josh Bonner, or you take Matt Brass, or you take Josh Bonner's predecessor, it will give you a list of some of the issues that they have taken a stand on. It will give you positions that they've held in the past. It will show you the election results from past elections on specific ballot questions, which I think was the specific question. Ballotopedia, if you look up the 4 amendments that we're going to be voting on, it gives you a general synopsis of what those questions mean in plain English, and it will also give you a list of the different people who supported it through each step in the state legislative process. It will say, okay, these senators voted for it, these senators voted against it. These state reps voted for it, these state reps voted against it, and these were the arguments for it, and these were the arguments against it. And so you then can make your decision on how you would then vote. But Ballotopedia, or Ballotopedia, I always call it Ballotopedia, I guess, but whatever. Yeah, that's always a good spot to start. And that will give you a lot of really good information. That's an excellent place to start. The other way to do it is call your state rep. Hey, How do you feel about this? Why did you vote? You voted no on it. Why did you vote no on it? Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, now I have some more understanding of the political process and the games that went into the specific wording of a ballot question. For instance, Amendment number 1 that everybody in this room is going to be voting on addresses the state intervention in public schools found to be chronically failing. Is that good? Is that bad? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I don't know. The governor had governors in favor of it. There are a lot of people that I admire and respect who are opposed to it. There are a lot of people who I don't admire and don't respect at all who are also opposed to it. Why are a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans aligning on that particular issue? That's kind of weird. So that's something that you guys ought to be doing research on and know before you go in to check to make your preference on the ballot beforehand. That was a good question. Thank you. Got to that a little earlier than I wanted to. Any other questions? Yes?
Okay, so I'm looking at the sample ballot, and it's saying, authorizes that or dedicates that. And I go, gee, I don't know. Where can I find a commentary, both pro and con, that I can?
We can talk about that later, but just for the sake of simplicity for the crowd as a whole, if you go to Ballotpedia, it will give you a list of the people, or it should give you a list of the people who voted for or against it. Okay? Yeah, amendment number 1. Before it can go on the ballot, it has to be voted on by the Georgia legislature. And so, and that's something that everybody should know how the process works. How did this even come to be on the ballot? It's a very political process as to the exact wording of what goes on your ballot. There's a lawsuit currently pending to get this off the ballot. It's going to fail because of, technically speaking, it's too late, but that filed suit against the governor because they didn't like the language of how this amendment was presented to the public, because by and large, the public doesn't know what this amendment is. So the wording is very important because the wording can sell it one way or sell it another way. Okay? So again, this is where vigilance and diligence come into play. Okay? Let's get a show of hands. Who here is married? Awesome. Y'all like being married? Being married's cool. Okay. Very good. Who here has a job or has ever had a job?
I got one now.
All right. Excellent. Me too. I like being employed. All right. Who here has ever played organized sports? Has in the past. Okay. I don't know if you call what you do, Brian, playing, but you know. Just kidding. Just kidding. He's our shortstop. It's okay. Yeah, he's better than I am. All right. And who here, before you got married, or before you got a job, or before you joined that organized sports league you joined, knew how to do any of those things? Well, some of us are born with a natural ability to know everything, but before you get married, you don't know how to get married. Yeah, you don't know how to get married. How do I find a girlfriend? I don't know. I mean, I was totally lost when I was a teenager. I'm a very fortunate man to have a wife. But you don't know how to do that. How do you find a job? I don't know. You gotta get out there and be self-motivated to learn it. You wanted a job. You had to have a job. You took the initiative and went out and you did it. Okay? Organized sports is the same way. If your kid's in soccer, you don't know where soccer leagues are when your baby first comes to you on that first day. You don't know what leagues they're going to join, but you figure it out because it's a priority for you. It's the same with elections. It's the same with the political process. I'm being a little harsh because I need to be. If you don't know who your elected officials are or how the political process works, shame on you, because you have a duty and a responsibility to your fellow citizens to stand against tyranny and oppression and to represent that which is in accordance with God's perfect design for how society ought to be structured. Take the initiative the same way you did with those other things that were important to you and find out. So when I talk about involvement, it's not so much the P's and Q's as to how do I do it. When I really get down to it with people, it's never I don't know how. It's that I'm not motivated enough to figure out how on my own. That's usually the problem. And that's not a very pleasant message to hear, but that's honestly what it is. When you think about the church as a whole and statistically, how many Christians didn't vote in the last couple of elections, presidential or otherwise, it's not from a lack of know-how, it's not from a lack of expertise, it's not from anything other than they just didn't have the gumption to get up off their butts and go do something about it. That's what it is. They passed by. This is not the. It's a word picture. It's not what this parable was really about. It was a rebuke of the man that asked the question. But it's like walking by somebody who's beat up on the side of the ground and not taking the initiative to help the guy out. Okay, that's what that's like. But the other part that I wanted to cover in the time that I have left was a general walkthrough of the electoral process from the county, from local, from your actual individual neighborhood. Your neighborhood has a say in how your individual local neighborhood has a say in how the presidential candidate is picked for each individual party. And then walk from the neighborhood all the way to the national level, which will then get to Natalie's question about the Electoral College. So in both, each state in the United States is different. Each state has their own individual rules for how elections are to be conducted, okay? Each state has two parties, the Republican and the Democrat Party. There are other parties too, but by and large, those are the only two. Those are the only two that are in every single state, I should say. And those two parties, they each have their own rules as to how their own internal operations are conducted, okay? And each rule within each state is different. So within Georgia, in the Georgia Republican Party, you've got it's closely aligned with how the Democrats do their process in the state. In some states, Democrats and Republicans do things very differently. In Georgia, it's not the case. So in Georgia, 2 years in advance of the presidential primaries, we'll just use the presidential primaries as an example, there are meetings in February, and they're called precinct mass meetings. And at those precinct mass meetings, people from individual neighborhoods come. It was over at Peachtree City Christian Church a couple of years ago, and you sit at a table with people who live very, very close to you. Okay, it's a big old auditorium. There are a bunch of people there, and you elect from those tables someone to represent you as your precinct chairman and as a delegate to the county convention. Okay, so that happens in February, and anybody can show up, anybody can do it. You walk in, and you don't have to show an I'm a Republican card. You could just walk in, and you just begin participating. You then become a delegate or a county chairperson to the county convention. That happens in March. The county convention then elects delegates, sets the rules for the county party, which then determine local elected official rules and the process by which local Republicans will be determined. So if you want to be a Republican county commissioner or run for Republican county commissioner or Republican tax commissioner or sheriff or whatever, the county Republican Party is the one that sets the rules that those candidates have to abide by in order to get on the ballot as a Republican. Okay, so the county convention is very important because you set the rules, but you also elect people to your district convention. District convention happens a month later. District convention for all of us, it's going to be the 3rd district. That's usually either held in Newnan or in Columbus. Last year it was in Fayetteville, but that's rare. Usually it's in Newnan or Columbus. I just centralized. If you don't know what the 3rd congressional district is, look it up. That's your United States congressman. So the 3rd district convention sets rules for the district. For candidates who want to run as Republicans in the district, that's where those rules are set. And then also at that convention, you elect people to go to state and be your state representatives. So the people who go to the state convention are representing Republicans statewide. And that's really important because if they don't actually, in their mind, in their thought process, actually represent the majority of what Republicans think, or Democrats, or Republicans think in that state, then you're going to get a result from the state convention that doesn't marry up with what Republicans really want. So if Republicans broadly aren't active in selecting who their leadership is, then the rules that govern who is selected as your presidential nominee, won't be what you want. So all of this happens a couple of years in advance of the presidential election. So I mean, some states do caucuses. Like if you guys were watching the election returns on election night, you'll see some do, like Iowa does caucuses. What is that? And then some do delegate pools, and some do, and the way that they vote are different. And each of those different systems has different pros and cons within it, and makes it easier or harder for one type of candidate or another to get elected. And so the people, when you go to the state convention, you then are electing people to go to your national convention, okay, and be delegates to that. And it's the same process there. They're setting the rules for the game that the politicians have to play in order to get the nomination for your county, for your party as a whole. So again, showing up as a representative for your neighborhood can have a very real and direct impact on the process by which we choose our nominee, and thus the nominee, him or herself. And the other argument is, okay, so getting involved and knowing what you're doing when you vote, and actually being participatory in your community as a whole, as we're commanded to be, that has a real impact on who your leaders eventually become. So the people who start off, 15, 16, we have young Republicans, young Democrats who get started, and they're going to be the ones that are leaders of the future. And so if you're not active and participatory, then you get no say in who those leaders eventually become. And you get the government that you deserve. And so if you're not active and participatory up until that point, you really don't have a whole lot of, leg to stand on to complain about who your leaders are. So next up comes the national election. Now, up to this point, we've all been talking about, Republican specific, because that's the party that that you choose your nominee. So back in March, we had a presidential preference primary here in Georgia, and that was not. And the idea behind that is to select, when you voted for whoever you voted for, you're voting for your preference of the candidates that made it through the selection process under the Republican Party rules in their individual states and nationally. So you're not choosing who you want to be president, you're choosing which of the candidates available to you would be your best preference. And then presidential preference primary comes and goes, and then now you have the national election. You're not choosing who you want to be president. You're choosing which of the candidates who are the finalists from the system that was started years ago is your preference amongst the candidates you have. Okay? And the Electoral College, that is not party specific. That is a federal system that was started by our founders, and that's a history lesson in and of itself. But essentially, the purpose of federalism and the Electoral College and how U.S. senators were originally selected, the idea behind it was to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Again, power can take many forms. It can be being good looking. It could be being influential. It could be having the right friends. It could be having money. It could be physically being powerful, or having a group of people, a gang behind you that can enforce your will. So the founders realized that, practically speaking, you don't want to have whoever gets the most votes necessarily to be the winner. You want to have a system set up so that the majority cannot oppress the minority. And that's the idea behind the Electoral College. You are not, when you vote for president in the United States on November the 8th, you aren't actually just choosing your preference either. You're choosing an elector that will go and cast a ballot for the person in accordance with the state rules where those electors go. Not all states necessarily have to give all of their electors to the person that gets the direct popular vote within that state. There are rules set, and those rules are set years in advance of the election. Okay, so that's kind of a in a very, very ugly nutshell, kind of what the process looks like going from your neighborhood to the national level and how the chain of influence kinds of steps up as you move forward through the process. So that was a very good question. If I haven't scared anybody off, what other good questions are there? Go ahead. Those are determined based on. Yep, thank you for catching me. The question was, why do some states have more electoral votes than others? Those are electoral votes are changed given the census. They are based on population. So California has the most. California has the most people. The founders didn't want for the minority to lord over the majority either. They want for their primary goal was the protection of individual rights. They felt like those rights are given to you by God, and it's not the government's job to give those to you or to take them away. It's the government's job to protect those. And so the government we have, the government as we kind of think of it now, is a direct result of the fall. Man sinned, so we're going to be impinging upon each other. And so the government is never going to be perfect, but they kind of figured that we don't want the majority lording over the minority, and we don't want the minority lording over the majority either. So we want the fairest system possible, and the Electoral College is kind of how they came up with it. But it is population. Excellent question. Yes, ma'am. No. Call if you want an absentee ballot. You can get a copy of your absentee ballot request form on the My Voter page, but I would recommend you call the office instead of playing telephone and trying to figure it out. Just call the office. If you're in Fayette County, you're going to talk to either Karen or Lee or April. They're all super sweet, and they love to help people to vote. They love it. It's awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. I get that question a lot. Okay, what time do we end here? 10? Okay, I got 4 minutes. All right, that'll be fun. All right, so instead of giving you guys a history lesson on where we got the ballots that we got and how we got the machines that we got, I'm just going to kind of tell you how the system works, okay? So when you go to a polling place, you're going to be asked to show your identification, prove who you are. They're going to look you up. They're going to see where you live, and they're going to give you a district combo. A district combo is a combination of the candidates who overlap where you live. So those are the candidates you have a right to vote for. Not everybody in this room is going to be voting for the same candidates, as I said, because like Josh Bonner, for instance, he doesn't cover all of Fayette County. So if you live in the very northern part of Fayette County, Josh Bonner's not going to be on your ballot. Somebody else is. Okay, so each person's individual registered address, they're going to be given a district combo, and then that district combo will then be given to the next volunteer who puts it on an electronic card. That electronic card goes into the voting machine. You turn it on, you make your preference, and there it goes. So from there, those machines are not connected to anything. They are not internet connected. These machines were designed back in the late 90s, okay? So think about where the internet was back then versus where we are now. Okay, those machines are not connected to anything. The only thing that they have is an electronic memory card that is locked in there. You cannot get it unless you physically manhandle the thing or you have the key. Okay, that's what poll workers are for, to make sure that doesn't happen. So the votes are tabulated electronically within that device, and then at the end of the day, those votes are then, or those machines are then physically brought to our elections office. I sit on the Fayette County Board of Elections, so it's my job to certify the elections themselves as they take place and to count the actual ballots. So when the machines come to us, we alone have the key to take those cards out. We then plug those cards into a machine that is also not internet connected, and all it does is it tabulates all the different votes that were collected, and it does so two ways. One is electronic, and the other is using an old ticker tape kind of receipt paper kind of thing. So we get a hard copy of all the votes that were tabulated, and we have an electronic copy of all the votes that are tabulated. And again, nothing is connected to the internet at this point. Once those votes are tabulated, we then take the computer count, and we then manually upload those tabulations to the Georgia Secretary of State's website. So when you're watching the returns on election night, and the reason you see, oh, X percent precincts reporting, whatever, each poll manager has to physically drive to our office, drop off their machine. We have to physically take those cards, plug them in, and actually work through the process in order to get an accurate count for each precinct. And so that process takes time. I mean, sometimes traffic has something to do with it. So, yeah, it does. And so once those votes are tabulated, we then go through a series of checks to make sure that all the machines were working properly and the votes, as we understand them to be, are correctly tabulated. And then we then sign off and certify that the elections, to the best of our knowledge, are correct. And we send those to the Secretary of State, and that's when you see them on the news. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sworn to secrecy on some of the technical knowledge that I have, but I can tell you that there are checks within the system to recognize when a non-approved card is used. And we also, quite frankly, we have the Sheriff's Department that is on site at all the school precinct locations, and they patrol individual locations. And we have poll workers who are, I mean, if you pay attention when you go vote on November the 8th, or if you go early vote, you can vote in 3 places in Fayette County, I think 2 or 3 places right now in Coweta County. I'm not in Coweta County very much, but 2 places. So if you pay attention, you only have that card in your hand. You're only allowed to use that one card, and they watch you. If you use anything other than that card, they should stop you and flag you. And then the machine also will flag you if you're using anything other than an approved card. And then when you leave, they make absolutely sure that you turn that card in. So there is a little bit of a physical vigilance that has to be executed on the part of the poll workers themselves to make sure. But the only times that I've seen in this country where machines like ours are still used and voter fraud is alleged to have happened, it's pretty obvious when it does, because the machines make it very difficult to stand there and physically manipulate stuff. Also, you're not allowed to use cell phones while you're in the voting booth, which is, and that's partly why. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is. On the Board of Elections, we have a Democrat, we have an independent who's appointed by the county commission, and we have a Republican. Democrat was elected by the Democrats, like an actual election. The Republican was elected by the Republicans, and the independent was appointed by the county commission. So we all kind of check and balance on each other. But yeah, the machines only take those specific kinds of cards, and you only can get those cards specifically from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer doesn't give those cards out unless you are a certified person who is certified government organization who is authorized to use those kinds of cards. They're very, very well protected. Mm-hmm. Absentee ballots, by and large, are counted prior to the machines being tabulated. The first thing we do when we get there that night, while we're waiting for the precinct managers to come in, is we actually start tabulating the absentee ballots. And we have until 5 p.m. the Friday prior to, or the Friday after the election, to get all of those absentee ballots in. By and large, you'll see that absentee ballots are cast in the same general proportion of votes of the neighborhood around them. In other words, if 80% of Fayette County votes for Donald Trump and 20% votes for Hillary Clinton, then 80% of absentees from Fayette County are going to be for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. So the absentee ballots rarely make the difference in a national election. They can make the difference in a local election, but those are tabulated and they have to be before 5 p.m. the Friday after the election.
And so fraud on the absentee ballot.
We have checks and balances for the absentee ballots as well. And a lot of that has to do with who is authorized to request an absentee ballot and how the absentee ballot can be sent to us. Like, for instance, you can't vote online in Georgia. And that, in my mind, is a good thing. As far as, if I can ever help it, we'll never have online voting in Georgia. But yeah, they have to be mailed in, and then there's a check and balance to make sure the ballot that was sent is the one that was received back, cast. There are multiple eyes that check the vote itself to make sure that the vote registered as the vote that was given. and so on. But yeah, the absentee ballots are counted in a separate process. We check the machines. We do what's called zeroing out the machines prior to doing anything. Yes. Okay, that can that can only happen if the person was never registered as dead. So on the our Board of Elections meets once a month. So you guys ought to come out to a Board of Elections meeting, just see what the heck is going on. You should also do the same for County Commission and Board of Education. If you've never been to a Board of Education meeting, shame on you. They are a ball of fun. But voting every month, one of the things that we do is we certify that someone is dead. Part of my job is to actually say, yes,